Welcome DMs to the Master of Dungeons, a channel where we look at making our creatures and NPCs more interesting for our worlds. We look at skills and tactics to help improve our games and hopefully bring new challenges to our players. So with this I thought, what should we look at first? What monsters of legend should we kick off with? Vampires, beholdens, dragons, giants. But then I thought, the world is the most important, right? Without the people who populate our world, then monsters are not as dramatic or important. Without that monster terrorising our village, our players are just killing a creature for no real reason, except a desire to kill things. And so let's take a look at where to start. Now with a module, the work is already done for us. The people who populate villages, towns and cities are already crafted for us. But I want to talk about what I do for each village, town and city, and hopefully this will be a good advice for you. Now eventually every party will want to go into a place with a populace. Even a full party of druids will eventually want to buy things and trade in all their delicious loot. But building civilization doesn't need to be hard. The way I do this is pretty easy and exactly the same for everywhere. For a start, villages, towns and cities all run in the same sort of premise, and just vary in scale. Firstly, all will have some kind of leader, a mayor or ombudsman, a king, something of that sort. But it's the same process in any new place. Just randomly roll a name, race and flip a coin on gender. Age isn't much of an issue, just remember why is a younger leader in charge? What happened to the previous one? Generally, people in higher authority comes with age, because with age comes wisdom. So it's something to consider. Next is the local law enforcement. And no matter the size of the place, it should have a couple of general rules. One, there will be a highest legal authority of some kind, with some kind of policing unit in the city watch or some sort of local sheriff. And two, they will have a second in command, one they can turn to for assistance in the daily rigours of life. Obviously, depending on how big a population of your village, it's probably only those two guys, maybe a couple more. And the city will be significantly higher, so probably needs some extra names for subordinates. But when your party gets into trouble or wishes to report trouble to the local law, you only really need those two individuals for them to meet. A random name and gender for the one in charge, obviously needing to be older in age than the subordinate, and as for race, just make them whatever the predominant race of the location is. It will most likely be human, but in elvish towns and dwarvish towns, obviously it will be probably one of those. After I've got the names and races of these three NPCs, I start to think of taverns and merchants. Most villages will have one, maybe two taverns, whereas cities will have a huge variety. Now, most parties aren't going to check out every tavern, so all you really need is probably one bar owner, but have a backup just in case. Depending on the quality of the village, make your tavern like a standard moderate quality, and if you want a second, make it poor. In towns, then you can add comfortable and squalid. And if it's a more populated town, then you add in some wealthy. Of course, rolling up and having some random tavern names on hand is a wise idea in being prepared too. For merchants, a village has probably only got a smithy and a general store. Adding more types of stores in towns and once in cities, add pretty much any merchant you can think of. Although keep esoteric merchants like magic item sellers and alchemists to a handful of your most important cities across your world. The reason I do this is twofold. One, it means that your players can't just pick up magic items everywhere. They should be rare and hard to get. If they're easily bought, they're less special, and you risk overpowering your party. And two, your party should be forced to get to other locations for the better goods, of course. If you're only basing your adventure in a single location, or mind you, making sure that your party has easy access to all potential goods is the best idea, as they could probably potentially get bored. So randomly generate someone for your smithy and for your general store, and then just have a handful of other NPC names on hand for the bigger places that your party might visit. As for personality, I haven't actually touched on this, but I think it's about time I did. The DMG has a whole generator for each NPC's personality, but I don't think you need anything as complex. Most NPCs want to go about their lives, work, go home to their families, and not have them screwed up by adventurers or monsters. And for the general populace as well, that's pretty much what will happen. As for those your party might interact with, generally the leader of your area will probably be too busy for your party, so have some subordinate deal with them, and only put up with them if they really have to. Of course, some backgrounds like noble will force some kind of etiquette, but they can generally avoid it unless it's a major incident. The local law will either want your party to stay out of whatever they're up to, or be so understaffed they'll be desperate for their help. Either way, it's pretty easy to roleplay. As for merchants, this is the real crux of your town, and no matter who they are, I run them the same way. Adventurers are bad for business. They will come into towns and villages, cause all kinds of havoc, and probably drop a platinum in a village or bring massive amounts of jewels and expect some sort of fair price on sale and break the entire economy of this tiny village, and try and scam the best deal they can on anything they wish to buy. When adventurers first come to town, I have my merchants add on a 20% Euro potential murder hobo tax immediately. No matter how much money you throw at your party, they will scream poverty at you. I mean, they could have just killed Tiamat and spent a year raiding a horde in the Nine Hells with 1,000 portable holes, and they'll still tell you they can't afford the 2 gold to buy a dagger. So I have merchants add 20% and roll deception immediately. The reason I have them roll deception is because, of course, they are lying about the price of their goods. Then, unless your PCs ask for a insight check on how much the price is, then you can just use their passive insight. It's literally what it's there for. Then, if they wish to negotiate, they can persuade your merchant and see what their role is on their persuasion. If they succeed and beat the merchant's deception, the merchant will be willing to drop the 20%. Then on a nat 20 or something like a 25 rebuttal and persuasion, I'll drop the price to under 10%. If the party doesn't negotiate, the merchant had the best day. They go home, tell their family, I made some great money scamming adventurers out of their money, which is all they really want. In villages, I leave the deception to a straight roll, but for towns and cities that probably see more adventurers coming through, I might have them roll deception with advantage because they're used to adventurers ripping them off. The last thing I do on civilization building is working out religion. For a village, I find it harder simply because no matter your pantheon, you're probably looking at a minimum of 6 gods, one for each alignment that isn't evil. Now, in towns and cities, it's easy. You have one temple or shrine or place of worship devoted to each god, and then you have the huge variety that players love. Randomly rolling those priests or spiritual leaders is easy. You just roll a name, race, and gender, and you're done. Villages are harder because really what you decide pretty much shapes most of your common folk. So what I do is usually when I look at villages is I look at their major commerce. If it's by the sea, they're probably fishermen mostly, and if it's land, probably farmers. If they're in mountainous or forested areas, probably hunters, most likely hunters for their food. So with those in mind, they would want gods devoted to their main supply of food. They would worship some god of the sea for a good supply of fish each day and calm weather. So something like Cord, Umberley or Poseidon. For land-based farming, they would want a god to bless their crops and give them fair weather. So Pelor, who is a god of agriculture, is ideal. And for mountains and forests, lots of food and nothing that will kill their hunters, so gods like Melora or Sylvanus perhaps. The other type of religion would be some kind of god devoted to law and justice, like Bahamut or Kelenvor. One tied to the law of your land for any kind of criminal activity that's about. Which means having a couple of holy people on hand is ideal, particularly if you have a paladin or cleric in the party, because they will immediately gravitate to a place of worship, even if it isn't to their god. The last thing I then look at is interesting NPCs who the players might run into. If they have a quest or need to find someone to start a quest, you'll probably want a couple of points of contact for that. If they're an NPC from your players' lives, of course, then having them on hand as well would be handy. And that tiny bit of prep work should be all you really need to have you set up your towns, villages, and cities. I hope this helps anyway. Next time I'll look at something that you can throw at your party in a fight and see how we can make it more interesting and not look like just a back and forth on who dies first. With that in mind, safe dungeon delving, and I'll see you soon.